To the untrained eye, the map of the world is a finished masterpiece. A neat grid of latitude and longitude lines bordered by sharp national frontiers, representing a planet neatly divided, categorized, and owned. But what if this grid is actually an illusion? A sophisticated cage of ink and pixels designed to erase thousands of years of human geography. What if some of the most advanced civilizations on Earth mapped their worlds not with borders and coordinate planes, but with songs, trails, and ancestral memories? To find out, we must travel to the most remote corners of the globe, unearthing the invisible mapmakers who are using countermapping, 3D laser scanners, and digital sovereignty to dismantle colonial empires and reclaim the soul of their homelands. By the end of this film, you will never look at a map, a museum display, or the concept of territory the same way again. You will understand how maps have been weaponized as tools of conquest, how indigenous cultures are deploying cutting-edge technologies to restore their ancestral footprints, and how the survival of humanity in the face of the climate crisis depends on reclaiming a relational, deep-time connection to the Earth. In the winter of 1822, two British Royal Navy ships, the Hecla and the Fury, became hopelessly trapped in the thick, unforgiving ice northwest of Hudson Bay. Led by Captain William Edward Parry, these men were searching for the Northwest Passage, the elusive maritime route they believed would secure British dominance over global trade. To the British Admiralty, this was a frozen void, an empty, perilous wilderness, a terra nullius, land belonging to no one, waiting to be surveyed, claimed, and tamed by the Crown. But to the Iglooling Inuit who lived there, this land was anything but empty. It was Nuna, a living homeland. When Captain Parry, desperate for geographical guidance, asked two Inuit hunters to draw a map of the coastline, they did something that stunned the British officers. Using charcoal on paper, they sketched a coastline of thousands of miles with mathematical precision, naming every inlet, bay, and island. How did a people without standard surveying equipment, compasses, or formal coordinate systems map an area larger than Western Europe? The answer lies in a completely different way of seeing the world, a geography of relations, not of divisions. For centuries, the Western world has used standard cartography not simply to describe space, but to conquer it. By treating indigenous territories as blank spaces on a map, colonial powers legitimize the theft of billions of acres of land, erasing the civilizations that had managed them since time immemorial. But today, the invisible maps of these civilizations are rising from the margins. To understand indigenous cartography, we must unlearn the Cartesian grid. Western maps are static, dividing space into abstract parcels of property. But indigenous mapping is hodological. It is a geography of movement, of pathways, trails, and storytelling. Knowledge is not something that sits on a shelf. It is performative, created and reinforced as people move through space. Consider the ancient maps made by Native American leaders. The Ojibwa migration chart, preserved on a 2.6-meter birchbark scroll, does not measure miles. Instead, it records a sacred journey, mapping spiritual milestones, ancestral camps, and cosmological events across space and time. In these systems, a line is not a boundary, it is a trail. And then there is toponymy, the naming of places. In oral-based cultures, place names are not arbitrary labels. They are historical compacts. When an indigenous person speaks a traditional place name, they are repeating the exact words their ancestors spoke when establishing their original relationship with that ecosystem. These names hold ecological data, where to find medicinal plants, when the river ice is safe, and where the dead are buried. Erasing these names was a deliberate strategy of colonization. By replacing traditional toponyms with the names of European explorers, colonial states severed the linguistic and historical ties between people and their lands. As colonial states mapped and carved up indigenous lands, another process of extraction was underway. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, European and American scholars practiced what they called salvage ethnography. Operating under the racist theories of social evolutionism, popularized by figures like Sir Edward Tyler, they believed that indigenous cultures were static, primitive relics destined to go extinct under Western modernization. Under this salvage model, anthropologists and collectors stripped communities of their sacred items, ceremonial regalia, and even the physical remains of their ancestors. These belongings were deposited in museums in the global north, classified under abstract Western categories that stripped them of their living context. The sacred was translated into inventories. Living cultural entities were treated as dead data sets. For decades, these museums functioned as object prison environments, holding physical remains and cultural heritage behind locked doors. These institutions claimed scientific authority, using research to justify the dispossession of lands. The very systems designed to preserve these cultures actually locked them away from the descendant communities who needed them to heal and survive. But a revolution is occurring within the archives. Originating communities are refusing to let their heritage remain locked in the vaults. Over a 3-year period, researchers traveled to every single Inuit community across the Canadian Arctic. They sat with hunters, trappers, and elders, developing a revolutionary methodology known as the map biography. Every participant was asked to recall and trace their lifetime history of hunting, trapping, fishing, and camping on transparent map overlays. This was not standard Cartesian mapping. This was counter-mapping, using the tools of the state to defend indigenous sovereignty. By translating oral histories into the rigorous evidentiary format demanded by Western courts, the Inuit proved that they had continuously used, occupied, and governed the Arctic since time immemorial. The final 3-volume report, published in 1976, became the legal foundation that secured the settlement of the Inuvialuit land claim and led directly to the creation of the self-governing territory of Nunavut in 1999. They had made an invisible history visible. The success of the Inuit Land Use and Occupancy Project sent shockwaves through the global anthropological community, demonstrating that maps could be used as tools of resistance. In 1996, this methodology traveled from the frozen Arctic to the opposite end of the Earth, the edge of the Kalahari Desert in South Africa. For decades, the Khomani San people had been systematically dispossessed of their ancestral lands, forced out of their homes inside the national park, and virtually erased from South African history. Government officials dismissed them as colored laborers, denying their identity and claiming they had no continuous link to the territory. To reverse this historic injustice, the San mobilized. Led by families like the Kripers and Malgasses, they used the Inuit mapping model as their template. They mapped their memories. But this mapping project faced an even deeper challenge. Under the violent pressure of the colonial and Boer societies, the San had been forced to hide their identity, and many believed their ancient language, N'u, was completely extinct. In a remarkable interview, San elder Uma Una Roy explained that her people had dug a physical and metaphorical grave for their language, burying it to protect themselves. But they did so with a promise. When they finally had a place at the table, the language would be disinterred and given life again. By mapping their lands, they disinterred their language, proving their continuous occupancy and reclaiming their rights to the Kalahari. While mapping territories is critical, Indigenous peoples are also fighting to recover the tangible belongings that were looted and deposited in Western museums. In many cases, physical repatriation is blocked by complex international legal barriers or the outright refusal of museums to surrender ownership. This has given rise to a highly contested practice: virtual repatriation. At the Smithsonian Institution, the Repatriation Office collaborated with the Tequati clan of Angoon, Alaska. to digitize the sacred mother bear hat and sculpin hat. Using state-of-the-art 3D scanning and computer-aided milling, they produced exact physical replicas of these hats from red cedar. In Tlingit culture, these hats are not static art objects. They are atu, sacred possessions that hold the spirits of ancestors, and they must be danced in ceremonies to remain alive. By returning these physical replicas, museums allow the objects to dance again, re-establishing the spiritual continuity of the clan while the originals remain preserved. In Canada, the Inuit Cultural Resource Centre took virtual repatriation a step further. Using an open software framework called the Reciprocal Research Network, or RRN, they accessed the digital catalog records of the McFarlane Collection held at the Smithsonian. They used the network's application programming interface to import these records into their own local portal, Inuit Living History. They overrode the museum's academic classifications, organizing the items according to Inuit knowledge structures and adding community interpretations, traditional names, and historical photos of community members. It was a digital return, transforming dead archival data back into living community records. But digital repatriation carries a major peril. When museums put digital copies of sacred Indigenous items online under open access policies, they often ignore the fact that they are making culturally sensitive, sacred, or restricted knowledge freely available to everyone without consent. In doing so, Western institutions repeat the original colonial act of plunder, claiming intellectual property rights over digital surrogates produced from stolen artifacts. To push back against this digital colonialism, Indigenous scholars and communities created the Local Contexts platform, establishing traditional knowledge, or TK labels. These are digital tagging systems designed to be integrated directly into institutional catalog systems and online archives. Unlike standard copyright law, which focuses on individual ownership and commercial exploitation, TK labels convey community protocols, customary laws, and expectations for the proper use of cultural heritage. The Squelmets Band of the Stolo First Nation in British Columbia integrated 3 adapted TK labels onto their public website to educate youth and the wider public. They used attribution, outreach, and non-commercial, translating them into their own language, Halkomelem. Similarly, the Musqueam First Nation developed Musqueam versions of the labels for their library collections to correct historical misattributions. In Washington, D.C., the Library of Congress worked with the Passamaquoddy tribe to place TK labels on 1890 wax cylinder recordings of tribal voices. These labels are not buried in catalog notes. They are placed close to the content, asserting that the community holds the ultimate authority over how their ancestors' voices are heard and used. As the decolonial movement restructures archives and mapping, it is also forcing a radical reimagination of public spaces and the very concept of the museum. In Ghana, curator and researcher Ya Ade Nantwi pioneered the Kiosk Museum in 2015. Built as a mobile, traveling architectural structure, The Kiosk Museum departs from the cold, intimidating stone edifices of colonial-era institutions. It brings curated collections of films and artworks directly into public spaces, adapting its exhibitions to the region and the people who engage with it. This is a shift from the museum as an object prison to the museum as a space for collective healing. Artist and shamanic practitioner Sandine Ditru introduced Healing the Museum, a series of ceremonies that use shamanism and commensally, the sharing of a meal together, to reactivate dead museum spaces. She argues that modern institutions founded in the wake of colonial empires are out of sync with their audiences. By introducing non-rational methodologies and rituals, Ditru reactivates the museum as a space for shared ethics, participation, and social change. This is the ultimate goal of decolonial archival practice, transforming repositories of stolen power into spaces for community empowerment. It means embracing other forms of cognition, vivid subjectivity, emotion, and affect. This battle over maps and museums is not just about the past. It is a critical struggle for our collective future. In Western society, the dominant capitalist ideology has long treated land, water, plants, and animals as commodities, matter to be owned, disassembled, and reassembled into private property for profit. This ideological disconnect has incentivized ecologically destructive practices, driving our planet toward a climate catastrophe. But traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, offers an alternative path. In Indigenous communities, knowledge is founded on the principles of kinship and reciprocity. Natural resources are not resources at all. They are relations. This is deep time and deep space science, developed over millennia of direct, continuous contact with the environment. As the modern world attempts to navigate the energy transition, standard green capitalist solutions often repeat the same colonial extractivism, mining critical minerals on indigenous lands without their free, prior, and informed consent. But as studies show, protecting biodiversity and ecosystems is impossible without respecting tribal sovereignty and knowledge systems. Indigenous knowledge is geographical, indelibly tied to place specificity. By protecting this knowledge, we protect the source code of human survival on Earth. We return to the ice. 2 centuries ago, the British explorers trapped in the frozen north could not see the rich, sophisticated network of geography that surrounded them. They saw a blank space, a void to be mapped and conquered. But the Inuit hunters knew every ridge, every star, and every ancestral memory written on that snow. Today, the blank spaces of the colonial map are being filled in. Memory has become the ultimate form of resistance. By weaponizing the cartographer's tools through countermapping, by reclaiming their stolen physical belongings through digital return, and by asserting sovereignty over their own data. Indigenous peoples are rebuilding the broken connections between people, pasts, presents, and futures. Without memory, there is no future. But with it, we can dismantle the empires of the mind and finally learn how to inhabit this earth together in a world of many worlds.